I was sitting on my porch with Max, my German shepherd, when the phone rang at 11:47 p.m. Not my cell, the landline I'd kept from the old days, the one only a handful of people knew about. Max lifted his head, ears forward. He always knew when something mattered. "Detective Santos!" The voice was thin, desperate, female. "My name is Claire. I don't have much time. Someone gave me your number. They said you help people the system forgets." My chest tightened. I'd been retired for 4 years, and I'd made peace with that. No more stakeouts, no more cases that ate you alive from the inside. Just me and Max, morning walks, the quiet hum of a life without violence. "Who gave you my number?" I asked. "A woman at the shelter. She said you'd understand. She said you wouldn't turn away." I heard breathing behind her voice, shallow, controlled, afraid. Max pressed against my leg, sensing something I couldn't yet name. "My name is Claire Mendez. I've been held by Vincent Caruso for 8 months. He's a very powerful man, very connected. I escaped 2 hours ago, but he's looking for me. He always finds me." The name hit like a punch. Caruso. I'd heard whispers of him during my final years on the force, organized crime, untouchable, protected by money and silence. The kind of man the system protects because the system is afraid. "Where are you?" I asked. "I'm at the 24-hour diner on Maple. I have maybe 20 minutes before." The line went dead. I stood up so fast my knees protested. Max was already at attention, reading the shift in my body like he always did. 30 years as a cop teaches you to recognize desperation in a voice. It teaches you what real fear sounds like, and it teaches you that some calls you can't ignore, no matter how quiet you've tried to become. "Come on, boy," I said, grabbing my keys. We were in the car before I'd fully thought it through. Max settled into the back seat, chin resting on the divider, watching the dark road unfold. The diner was 15 minutes away. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than they had in years. I didn't know it then, but that call would crack open everything I'd tried to leave behind. The violence, the injustice, the weight of knowing too much. It would also remind me why I'd become a cop in the first place. Because some people have no one else. The rain started as I drove, soft at first, then harder. Max stayed silent beside me, patient and present, the way he always was. He'd been my partner for 6 years, and he understood something most people didn't. Sometimes loyalty means showing up when it matters most, even when you've earned the right to walk away. By the time I pulled into the diner parking lot, the rain was coming down hard. Through the foggy windows, I could see a woman in a corner booth, dark hair, trembling hands wrapped around a coffee cup. Claire. I cut the engine and sat for a moment, rain drumming on the roof. "This is it, Max," I whispered. "This is how it starts." My German shepherd let out a low, steady breath, almost like agreement. We stepped out into the rain together, and I knew, with the bone-deep certainty that only comes from years of reading the world, that nothing would be simple from here on out. Justice rarely is. Chapter 2. The Weight of Trust. Claire's eyes found mine the moment I walked through the diner door. They were wide, dark, rimmed with the kind of exhaustion that only comes from real fear. When she saw Max, something shifted in her face. A fraction of tension released, like she'd been holding her breath for months, and finally allowed herself to breathe. "You came," she whispered. I slid into the booth across from her. Max stayed close to my leg, alert but calm. He'd been trained for this, reading people, staying grounded when everything around you is fractured. Claire reached out slowly, letting Max sniff her hand. He allowed it, pressing his head gently against her fingers. Sometimes an animal's trust matters more than all the reassurance a cop can offer. "Tell me everything," I said. "Start from the beginning." She wrapped both hands around the coffee cup, but it didn't stop the shaking. I was a dental hygienist, normal life. I met Vincent at a gallery opening. He was charming, attentive, seemed successful. I didn't know what he was involved in. By the time I understood, it was too late. How long were you together before he trapped you? 3 months dating. Then I saw something I shouldn't have. Papers, names, money transfers. He caught me looking at his computer. He said it was fine. Said he trusted me. She laughed, a sound like breaking glass. That was the moment everything changed. The trust was a cage. The waitress approached, but I waved her off. The diner was nearly empty. Just an old man at the counter nursing black coffee and a night shift manager who didn't seem interested in anything but his phone. Good. Privacy meant safety. Has he contacted you since you left? I asked. No, but he will. Vincent doesn't let things go. When he wants something, he gets it. And he wanted me to understand what it meant to belong to him, to learn that running wasn't possible. I studied her face. No visible bruises, but trauma leaves marks the camera can't capture. It lives in the eyes, the way someone holds their body, the careful calculation behind every breath. Do you have family? A sister in Portland. My parents are gone. No one knows I was with him. He was careful about that. He wanted no one to be able to come looking. Max rested his head on the booth seat next to Claire. She tentatively stroked his ears, and for a moment the rigid fear in her shoulders softened. Animals understand suffering in ways people sometimes don't. I'm going to help you, I said, but I need you to understand what that means. If Caruso is as connected as I think he is, this isn't just about getting you to safety. It's about making sure he can't reach you again, and that requires something most people aren't willing to do. What? She looked directly at me for the first time. The truth, all of it. Names, dates, what you saw, what he said, everything, so we can build a case that's strong enough to stop him. Fear flickered across her face again. He said if I ever talked to the police, he'd know. He said he has people in the department. It was probably true. Caruso had had years to build those connections. Not police, I said quietly. Me and Max. Off the books. At least at first. We gather evidence, we build leverage, and then we decide who we trust with it. But Claire, I need you to understand, this path is harder than just disappearing, but it's the only path that actually ends this. She nodded slowly, and I saw something crystallize in her expression. Not hope exactly, determination. The kind that comes when you realize you're tired of running. Okay, she said. I'll tell you everything. Chapter 3. First clues. The safe house was a small apartment I'd rented years ago for a witness protection situation that never quite materialized. It sat above a closed bookstore on the edge of the city, anonymous and forgettable, exactly what we needed. Claire had fallen asleep on the couch by 3 a.m., exhaustion finally overtaking adrenaline. Max lay on the floor beside her, one eye half open, standing guard the way he'd been trained. I sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad, and the note she'd given me before sleep claimed her. Names: Vincent Caruso, his uncle, Marco Caruso, a lawyer named Richard Holt, an accountant David Chen, a detective, and this was the one that made my blood cold, Detective James Morrison. Someone I'd worked with years ago. Someone I'd thought was clean. Dates she remembered, locations, the safe in Caruso's office where he kept the real records, a cabin upstate where deals were made, a judge named Patricia Wynne who'd dismissed several cases against Caruso's associates over the past 3 years. The pieces were there. They just needed to be connected. I made coffee at 4 a.m. and sat with my old laptop, accessing databases I probably shouldn't have been able to access anymore. But the credentials had never been officially revoked, one of the benefits of retirement on good terms with the right people. Judge Patricia Wynne, 3 dismissals in 4 years, all organized crime adjacent, all involving Caruso's network. I dug deeper. pulled financial records that required favors from someone I'd trained 20 years ago who now worked in the DA's office. Patterson answered on the third ring, groggy but willing. "Santos, it's 4 in the morning. I need information on Judge Wynne. 3 specific cases, years 2021, 2022, and 2024. I need to know if there were any irregularities in the dismissals." There was a long pause. "That's not a small ask, Santos. That's a judge." "I know what it is, Patterson. I also know you're the only person I trust to do this right." By 6 a.m., he'd sent the files. The pattern was clear. Judge Wynne had dismissed cases at moments that aligned perfectly with Caruso's interests, never in an obviously wrong way, always legally defensible, always with procedural reasons. But the timing was too precise, the correlation too perfect. I heard Claire stirring on the couch. Max lifted his head, then stood, stretching. She appeared in the kitchen doorway, looking smaller in daylight, more fragile. "You've been up all night," she said. "Found something. Your information was accurate. Caruso has protection inside the system. At least one judge, possibly a cop." "That's both good and bad." "How is that good?" she asked, fear creeping back into her voice. "Because now we know exactly how he's been operating, which means we know how to stop him." I turned the laptop toward her. "But first, I need to know about the cabin. You said deals were made there. Did you ever go?" She nodded slowly. "Once, in month 5. He wanted to show me. I think he wanted to scare me, to show me the stakes of what he was involved in." "What did you see?" "Men, serious men, documents on the table, and a ledger. Caruso kept a ledger, handwritten, leather-bound. I remember because he was so careful with it. He kept it in a safe, bolted to the floor. A physical ledger. If we could get that, combined with Claire's testimony and the circumstantial evidence about the judge, we might have something real, something that could move." Max pressed against my leg, sensing the shift in my focus. I scratched behind his ears, thinking through the angles. "If you're following this rescue so far, tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from," I said aloud, a habit from my old interrogation days, thinking through the narrative of what we were building. Claire gave me a strange look but didn't ask. Instead, she sat across from me, and for the first time since that midnight call, she looked like she was beginning to believe that escape might actually be possible, but belief and reality were still miles apart. And Caruso, by now, would be noticing that Claire had vanished. The clock was running. Chapter 4. Partnership in Motion. 3 days. That's how long we had before Caruso's people found the trail. Claire had been careful when she ran. No credit cards, no phone, nothing that would ping a location. But Caruso's network was extensive. He'd have cameras at the diner, phone records, connections with people who noticed things. Every hour that passed was an hour closer to him, narrowing the search. We needed to move. Max understood the shift immediately. When I brought out the equipment, the surveillance camera, the recording device, the folders for documentation, he stood and waited by the door. This was work. This was purpose. This was what we'd trained for together. "We're going to the cabin," I told Claire. "Not to confront him, to photograph the ledger, to get proof." "That's insane," she said, but there was no conviction in it. She already knew we had to try. "It's risky," I corrected. "Insane would be waiting for him to find you." I spent the afternoon preparing maps of the property, satellite images from online. I called Patterson again, told him I needed to know if there would be any police presence in the area. He confirmed that the local sheriff's department had Caruso on their radar, but no active investigation. Good. That meant no official coverage, but also no interference. The cabin was 40 minutes outside the city, nestled in woods that provided cover and isolation. Perfect for a man who conducted business in the shadows. We moved at 9 p.m. Me, Claire, and Max in my truck, headlights off for the last mile, parking half a mile through the trees. Claire was trembling again, but differently now, with purpose instead of just fear. "What if someone's there?" she whispered. "Then we don't go in. We wait. We observe. We're gathering intelligence, not taking action, not yet." Max moved beside me through the darkness like a shadow. He'd tracked suspects in the woods for years before retirement. His nose caught the wind, his ears swiveled towards sound I couldn't hear. This was his language: the night, the silence, the hunt for truth. The cabin appeared through the trees, dark except for a single light in an upstairs window. A car I didn't recognize was parked nearby. Someone was home. We moved to the tree line and stopped. Through a back window, I could see movement. A man on a phone, pacing. Not Caruso, but someone in his organization. A guard, probably, which meant the ledger was likely still inside. I pulled out my phone and texted Patterson, confirm surveillance on the cabin, one occupant, unknown identity. The response came back in 2 minutes. Traffic cam 3 miles south shows a black Escalade left the property at 6:47 p.m., destination unknown. Only one vehicle currently on premises. One guard, one person between us and the ledger. I looked at Claire, then at Max. Sometimes the best moves are the ones made when the moment is right and you trust your instincts. 30 years of detective work had taught me to read those moments. We wait, I decided. If the guard leaves, we move fast. If Caruso arrives, we disappear. No heroics. Understood? Claire nodded. Max settled beside me, alert and patient, the way only a trained dog can be. And we waited in the darkness. 3 people bound by desperation and determination. Each of us understanding that the next few hours would determine whether Claire got her life back or disappeared into Caruso's world permanently. The guard's phone lit up at 11 p.m. He answered, spoke briefly, then grabbed a jacket. Within minutes he was driving away, headlights cutting through the night. "Now," I said quietly. We moved. Chapter 5. Partial revelation. The back door was locked, but old, the kind that yields to pressure and the right tools. I had the tools. Max waited outside, positioned to alert me if anyone approached. Claire moved silently behind me, her breath shallow and controlled. Inside, the cabin smelled like expensive leather and money, the kind of wealth that comes from things that don't bear close examination. "Upstairs," Claire whispered. "The safe is in his office." The stairs creaked under our feet. I moved carefully, each step placed to minimize sound. Max's ears would warn us if a car approached. The seconds stretched like hours. The office door was open. Moonlight spilled through the window, and I could see it immediately, a leather-bound ledger sitting on the desk, almost ceremonial in its placement. Caruso's real records. The documentation of every transaction, every person paid off, every piece of leverage he held. But as I reached for it, I noticed something else. A framed photograph on the wall. Judge Patricia Wynne standing beside Caruso at what looked like a restaurant, both smiling. Not a hidden photo. This was something Caruso kept visible, a reminder of his reach. "The safe," Claire urged, pointing to a panel in the wall. I photographed everything, the photo, the ledger, the documents spread across the desk. My phone captured it all in high resolution, evidence, the kind that could change everything. That's when I heard the sound. Tires on gravel, a car approaching. "Move," I said, urgent but controlled. We were down the stairs and out the back door before the front door opened. Max was already alert, pressed against my leg, ready to run. We moved into the trees just as headlights swept across the property. We didn't stop until we reached the truck. Didn't breathe normally until the engine was running and we were moving down the dark road with the headlights off, navigating by feel and memory. Only when we were 5 miles away did I turn the lights on. Only then did the adrenaline begin to fade enough for me to think clearly. "Did you see that photo?" Claire asked from the back seat. I did. I've never seen that before. Caruso kept his connection to the judge hidden. At least I thought he did. Which meant he was getting bolder, or which meant he was beyond caring, who knew. Both possibilities were dangerous. I drove back to the safe house, my mind processing what we'd found. The ledger had names, dozens of them, cops, judges, politicians, business people, a network of corruption so extensive it made my chest tight. This wasn't just about Caruso anymore. This was systemic. This was what happened when one person had leverage over enough powerful people. "We have what we need," I said to Claire once we were inside. "But now we have to figure out who we can trust with it." She was pale, exhausted. Is anyone trustworthy? It was the question I'd been asking myself for 30 years. Chapter 6. Escalation. The call came at 3 a.m. Morrison's voice, low and controlled and terrifying in its calmness. "Santos, I know you have her. I know you went to the cabin. And I know you took photographs of things that don't concern you." My hand tightened on the phone. Max's head snapped up, sensing the shift in my demeanor. "How did you find this number?" I asked, though I already knew. Morrison had been a detective. He had access to everything I had. "You've been retired too long, old friend. You think you can walk away and still play this game? You think one woman and one dog are enough to take on what you've stumbled into? If you're this worried about it, then yeah, I think we might be." There was a sound like laughter. "You have until sunrise to bring Claire to the pier on 5th Street. Alone. If you don't, I'll burn your life down in ways you can't imagine. I'll implicate you in half a dozen cases you thought were closed. I'll make sure Max is put down for a crime you never committed. Do you understand?" The line went dead. I sat in the darkness for a long moment, my mind racing through angles. Morrison wouldn't make an empty threat, but he also wasn't stupid enough to actually kill us at the pier. That would be too visible, too traceable. He wanted us somewhere private, somewhere he could control the narrative. Claire emerged from the bedroom. "What happened?" I told her. She gripped the edge of the counter, knuckles white. "We can't go. It's a trap." "Of course it's a trap," I said, "which is why we're not going to show up." I called Patterson again. This time, I told him everything. The cabin, the ledger, the photographs, Morrison's threat. Patterson listened without interrupting. And when he finished, he said 5 words that shifted everything. "I'll call the FBI." "Not yet," I said. "Let me think." But even as I said it, I knew Patterson was right. This was bigger than the state police, bigger than local corruption. This was federal. This was the kind of case that required resources and protection we couldn't provide ourselves. 1 hour, Patterson said. "Can you keep her safe for 1 hour? Max and I can keep her safe for whatever's needed." I hung up and looked at Claire. "Pack a bag. Whatever you absolutely need. 1 bag. We're leaving." "Where?" "Somewhere Morrison can't follow." Max was already at the door, sensing action, sensing purpose. I grabbed the ledger photographs, backed them up to an encrypted drive, and sent copies to Patterson's secure email. Whatever happened next, the evidence was out of our hands. It existed in places they couldn't touch it. As I moved through the apartment collecting what mattered, documents, identity protection paperwork, cash, I felt it, the weight of knowledge that this was a point of no return. We were past negotiation now, past anything that looked like a normal resolution. If this story has you hooked, hit like. It helps us bring more true rescues to light, I said quietly, the words becoming part of the narrative I'd been carrying since the first midnight call. Claire emerged with a small bag. Max stood ready, his entire being focused on me, waiting for the next command. "Come on," I said. "We're going dark for a little while." Chapter 7. Collapse and Resolve. The safe house. Patterson found us was a farmhouse 60 miles outside the city, owned by a retired federal agent who owed him a favor. It was the kind of place that didn't exist on the internet, didn't have utilities in anyone's name, existed in the gaps between systems. We arrived as dawn was breaking. Claire had barely spoken during the drive, lost in the shock of understanding how deep this went, how far the corruption reached into the institutions that were supposed to protect her. Patterson arrived 6 hours later with 2 FBI agents and a woman in a suit who introduced herself as Special Agent Reeves. She laid out the plan: witness protection, new identity, relocation. The works. The FBI would take custody of the ledger photographs, verify their authenticity, and begin building a RICO case against Caruso and everyone in his network. "What about Morrison?" I asked. "He's already been arrested. We brought him in this morning based on the evidence you provided. He's talking, trying to negotiate. Turns out he's been in deep with Caruso for 15 years. And he's more frightened of his associates than he is of federal prison." The relief should have been overwhelming. Instead, I felt hollow. This was the moment where my part ended, where Claire was handed over to the system, to people trained for this, to the machinery of justice that I'd spent 30 years believing in and then 30 years doubting. "What happens to her?" I asked. "She testifies. Caruso goes to prison. His network gets dismantled. She gets a new life somewhere safe." It sounded clean. It sounded right. But I'd been a cop long enough to know that real life doesn't end that neatly. And if he has people who reach outside the system, he won't. Not after the charges we're filing, not after the cases we're reopening. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that this time justice would actually work the way it was supposed to. Claire had come out onto the porch. She was looking at Max, who was lying in the sun, finally relaxed, finally at peace. She sat down beside him and put her hand on his chest, feeling his heartbeat. "Thank you," she said to me, "for not walking away that night, for believing me." "That's what justice is supposed to be," I replied, "believing people when no one else will." But I knew it was more than that. Justice was also about being willing to break your own rules, to risk everything, to understand that sometimes the system is corrupt enough that you have to work around it. Justice was Max, sitting in the sun with a woman who'd almost lost her life. Justice was Claire, alive and free and safe enough to imagine a future. The FBI agents took her away at sunset. She didn't look back as they put her in the car, and I didn't need her to. I could feel the weight of it. The case closed, the rescue completed, the victory hollow and real all at once. Patterson remained on the porch. "You did good work, Santos." "I did what anyone should have done," I said. "That's where you're wrong. Most people would have hung up that phone. Most people would have stayed in retirement and let the system handle it." The system was part of the problem. Exactly. Which is why the system needed someone outside it, someone willing to risk everything. Max pressed his head against my leg, and I scratched behind his ears. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. Somewhere in that sky, Claire was driving toward a new life, toward safety, toward the possibility that what happened to her might actually lead to justice for others. "What will you do now?" Patterson asked. I looked down at Max, at the farmhouse, at the long road behind us. "Go home," I said. "Find a way to live with what I know." Chapter 8. Revelation and Justice. The trial lasted 6 weeks. I wasn't called to testify. The evidence spoke for itself. The ledger was authenticated. The photographs corroborated Claire's testimony. The financial records showed the trail of money, the connections between Caruso and everyone he'd bought. Morrison flipped on his former allies, hoping for leniency. He got 15 years instead of life, which in the hierarchy of federal sentences was considered a win for the prosecution. I watched from the gallery on the day of conviction. Caruso's face never changed. He was a man who'd lived his entire adult life believing he was beyond consequence. And even as the judge pronounced him guilty, even as the cameras flashed outside the courthouse, he seemed to be cataloguing the experience with the detachment of someone observing a problem that would eventually be solved. The judge was Judge Patricia Wynne. She delivered the sentence with measured authority, 30 years without parole. It was justice, technically, though we all knew the real story, that she'd been part of his network, that she'd protected him for years, that she was serving time herself in a different way. I'd asked Patterson about her afterward. "She'll be investigated next," he said. "But the statute of limitations on some things is running out. We might not get everything. That's the reality of corruption this deep. Some people escape. But not Caruso. Not this time." The day after the conviction, I received a letter. No return address. Postmarked from Portland. Inside was a photograph of Claire smiling in front of a coffee shop. On the back, "Thank you for believing. Thank you for being willing to risk everything. I have my life back now. You gave me that." I kept that photograph on the mantel, next to a picture of me and Max from the day I retired. A reminder that sometimes the system works. Sometimes loyalty and determination and a dog who understands the weight of justice can actually change things. Max had become something of a celebrity after the trial. The news had covered the story. Retired cop, loyal German shepherd, rescue operation, corruption dismantled. There were requests for interviews, for appearances, for Max to be used as a police dog again. I turned them all down. Instead, I took him for longer walks. We visited the park more often. I let him be a dog again, not a tool or a hero, but a companion. He'd earned that rest. But something had shifted in me. The quiet retirement I'd planned, the life of peaceful anonymity, it felt hollow now. I understood finally why I'd never been able to fully walk away from the job. Not because I was addicted to the adrenaline or the status or any of the reasons I'd told myself, but because some people needed someone to believe them, and I'd been trained to see the truth in a way most people weren't. Patterson called in late November. "We've identified 2 more judges in Caruso's network, different cases. We're building cases against them too. It's going to take years, but the dominoes are falling." "Because you pushed," I said. "Because you pushed," he corrected. "I just made the calls." After we hung up, I sat on the porch with Max. The seasons were changing. Winter was coming, and the world looked different now. Sharper, more real, stripped of the comfortable illusions I'd built around retirement. "I think we might be going back to work," I told Max. He lifted his head, and in his eyes I saw something I recognized. Not eagerness exactly, but readiness. Understanding. The knowledge that some of us are built for this, that some callings don't release you just because you've decided you're done. Chapter 9. Resolution and Quiet Peace. 6 months after Caruso's conviction, I got another call. This time it was from the DA's office. They were investigating cold cases. Women who'd gone missing, who'd been written off, who'd disappeared into the kind of silence that only happens when the system doesn't care enough to look. They suspected some of them were connected to Caruso's network. "We need someone to help identify patterns," the investigator explained. "Someone who understands how he operated, someone with a dog who can help with the search, if it comes to that." I told them I'd think about it. I didn't have to think long. By spring, Max and I were working part-time as consultants, helping to unravel the threads of what had happened to these women. Some were found, some were still missing, but for the families there was finally the acknowledgement that their loved ones had mattered, that someone was looking, that their disappearances meant something. One afternoon, I was walking with Max through the old neighborhood where I'd worked for 20 years. We passed the precinct, and I saw officers I'd trained, detectives I'd worked with, a whole generation of people who'd been shaped by the system I'd tried to leave behind. One of them called out to me, "Santos, we thought you were done." "Thought I was too," I said, smiling. "Turns out retirement looks different when you know what you know." Max pulled me toward the park, toward the open grass and the peaceful afternoon light. He was graying around the muzzle now. We both were. The years added up, the cases accumulated, the weight of knowing what happened in the darkness never quite lifted. But there was peace in it too. Not the false peace of ignorance or the hollow peace of isolation, but the earned peace of understanding that you'd done what you could, that you'd shown up when it mattered, that you'd been willing to risk everything when the moment demanded it. That night, I sat on the porch with Max. The city lights glittered in the distance. Somewhere out there, Claire was living her new life. Caruso was in a federal prison, his network dismantled. Morrison was serving his time. The dominoes had fallen, and the system, flawed as it was, had done what it was supposed to do. But more than that, Max and I had learned something essential, that loyalty isn't just the bond between a man and his dog, though that's part of it. Loyalty is also about bearing witness, about refusing to look away, about understanding that some fights are worth fighting even when the odds seem impossible. The night air was cool. Max rested his head on my leg, content and peaceful. Tomorrow there would be another case, another lead, another chance to help someone the system had overlooked. But tonight there was just this: a man, a dog, and the quiet knowledge that we'd done what mattered. Justice isn't always clean, it isn't always complete, but sometimes, just sometimes, if you're willing to believe, to risk, to show up when it counts, you can actually change someone's life. Max understood that, and so did I.